Welcome to this special edition of the Saturday Morning Interview. I'm your host, Khainga O'Okwemba. In today's program, we bring you the second and last part of an exclusive interview a KBC English Service had with veteran Kenyan journalist Salim Lone, described by the distinguished Kenyan literary scholar Professor Chris Wanjala as one of the most sensitive and perceptive journalists Kenya has produced. Salim Lone served as the director of the United Nations News and Media Division under Kofi Annan. He also served as former Prime Minister Raila Odinga's spokesman. Salim Lone is back as the National Super Alliance NASA presidential flag bearer, Raila Odinga's spokesman. In today's Saturday morning interview, Salim Lone speaks about NASA manifesto. Are there two manifestos or it's just one? Is NASA bent on having this election postponed with its court cases? How has the media fared in its coverage of this election so far? Salim Lone will clarify matters for us from Raila's presidential campaign. Salim, welcome to the Saturday morning interview once again.
It's a pleasure to be on this interview and on this program.
Looking at the manifesto, the party manifestos, would you say that yours is more superior than that one of Jubilee?
Well, there are two things. First, we're talking about manifestos. If you recall, the title of the Jubilee Manifesto, which came out first, was Continuing the Transformation. And I thought, what a terrible headline. If I had been on Jubilee side, I would have said, don't talk about continuing, because people are so unhappy. So many Kenyans of all communities and tribes leave out the idea of continuing. You remember in 2007, the Kibaki motto was Kazi Endelea, meaning we'll continue. And that really hurt them too. But of course, Kibaki ran a much better government than this one. So for Jubilee to say, we will continue what you're doing, even though you call it transformation, really hurt them. Because people are unhappy, That's number one. Number two, our two manifestos are completely different. Ours reflects a pro-people ideology. The other side reflects a pro-business and a pro-rich ideology. I'm not saying one is automatically better than the other, because you're allowed all points of view, conservative, radical, social, liberal, whatever, So people know what we stand for. That is why Raila has so much passionate support outside his main area of support, the base. There's no other politician in Kenya, remotely, who has so much passionate support outside his base. I mean, other leaders have support outside their base, but passionate support in the amount and the numbers that he has, none. But the main reason I think he is ahead, Raila, not the only, but the main reason, is because people are very unhappy. Across the board, as I said, including from the two communities who made the president and deputy president, put them in charge, because they find everything is very difficult now. Prices, the cost of living, they're trouble putting food on the table. Corruption has gone to a stage which is unprecedented, and it is so public. And one of the good things, by the way, about that level of corruption is I have seen that, one, people who previously accepted corruption as an unavoidable evil are now making the link, are realizing that corruption is actually making things too expensive for them. Not just that corruption is bad, but a lot of their problems come from corruption. This is a new thing I'm seeing, that recognition. And the other one I'm seeing is that how many people who belong to the communities led by the president and the deputy president are also complaining. So these are two very positive developments. And the latter development, if we can nurture it, meaning people beginning to think just having our own president is not going to help us. We need a good president. This would be a historic turning point for Kenya, because over the decades, ethnicity has become more and more central, unfortunately, in politics, negative ethnicity. And the height of it was in 2015, when the president and the deputy president said this is a marriage of two communities to come to power. That is the worst we've ever seen in an election, ethnicity. Remember in 2002, both the presidents who were running were Kikuyu, and no one minded. There were no Kenyans who were saying, how dare just Kikuyus, because they respected the situation at that time. But now, if I'm right, I see the beginning of the seeds of a new awareness amongst Kenyans that having your own person as a president is no guarantee that the ordinary people will actually benefit.
Talking about the manifesto, of course, there's that confusion about two manifestos actually emanating from NASA. There's one that has a title, A Strong Nation, National Super Alliance Coalition Manifesto 2017. And then there was another one, Road to Kenyan Dream, Implementing Our Manifesto. Okay, I think the second one has actually been called a Tenderpreneur Manifesto because it's sort of these mega projects that are proposed into that manifesto. Yes, what is the truth about these two manifestos? Is it propaganda or there are two manifestos?
Yeah, it's absolute propaganda, and there are no two manifestos. And this is a story, very simple story. David Ndii, one of the most respected Kenyans, is the head of a think tank for NASA. His group came up with a manifesto. That manifesto was approved by all 5 principals. But they did say that it is a little bit too technical for popular consumption. You need something that people can grasp. So the PM then tasked the secretariat of his campaign to come up with what they called a popular version, which would show what the implementation of the manifesto would mean to ordinary Kenyans. Because Kenyans also want to know, what will you do for me, not just your overall orientation. It was an excellent manifesto, just too tactical. So the notion that it was a businessman who did the second one, first is false. We had a 4-hour meeting with the 5 principals, David Ndii, the staff which had produced the popular version, and me, to discuss all this. This is how seriously NASA takes these things. 4 hours of intense discussion. And we decided by the 5 principals then that the second popular version, which is the implementation, should be also used because it will tell Kenyans more. Now, obviously, the second version is not identical to the overall orientation. Yeah. So there are no two manifestos. But it is being used, the two manifestos, argument is being used to say that cartels have penetrated NASA and that the second one is actually done for the cartels. So Jubilee is trying to shift the discussion on corruption away from them to NASA being led by cartels. That is a tactic that can only backfire because Kenyans know how much corruption there has been under Jubilee. While there might be some corrupt people in NASA, you can be sure that it is minuscule in terms of corruption. Mainly it is governments who do the corruption because they have the power to influence it. You cannot blame NASA as being one of the root causes of corruption. So they are using every tactic that they have to shift the attention away from their own corruption to corruption in NASA. And it won't work because people know NASA has no power to be corrupt.
Is there synergy between the 5 core principles of NASA?
Yes. You know, there are obviously differences. One of the biggest differences, as you know, is that we have run in many places competing candidates. And it is understandable, and yet it's unfortunate because when you have competing candidates against each other who belong to the same way of thinking, you're bound to, narrow down your vote. So that's a problem. But people ask this question when what they should really be saying, it is incredible that these 5 people came together even though many of them felt Raila should not again be the leader because he lost the last 2 times. Not that he lost in real terms, but the argument was they won't let him become president anyway. We know that. So why should we not have somebody else? That was a very strong feeling. So how come then Musalia and the deputy running mate, Kalonzo, how come they agreed to give up their ambitions? It's very simple. Their supporters wanted them to stay in this alliance, to join this alliance, because they knew it was the only way to win. And when they actually came together, those 4 and then 5, the day they came together, despite all the efforts of Jubilee to win over at least 1 or 2 of them, the day they came together was the day that NASA won, because they had such a huge following, the 5 of them together. And what I have seen now, since I've come back, is that so many regions, which were what you call Jubilee strongholds, are shifting to being in contention. I'll just give you one example. Meru was a Jubilee stronghold. Now we could get 1/3 to 45% of the vote there. And I'm not just saying it, I'm basing it on what people have seen, the huge rallies that we have had in Meru. We have seen the Maasai come back to NASA or to the parties and made Jubilee look very weak there. Everybody thought the Jubilee group has managed to have big influence on the Maasai. Not anymore. Articles have been written about that. So we've seen battleground states change shape towards NASA. And to begin with, we have so many other leaders who have their own support. So the combination of those leaders plus the communities which don't have leaders in the 5 shifting towards us that is very significant.
Now, we actually have this court ruling that stayed the printing of the ballot papers. Are you sure that we are going to have elections on August 8th?
Yes.
Are you comfortable having elections for parliamentarians and not the president? What is your position?
No. First of all, one has to be pragmatic. Before everything else, pragmatic. There might be some small fiddling on the other races, but the main fiddling comes with the presidency. We saw last time how many more people voted for the presidency than for all the others. 2 million. Do you believe that 2 million Kenyans went to vote and did not vote for their own representatives, only voted for the president? You know how passionate even the primary elections are. People are fighting with each other. Kenyans are very democratic, and we are lucky to have that spirit and have the freedom to be democratic. And the races are intense. I mean, some people feel more passionate about their local race than about the presidency even. So this notion that 2 million more people voted for the presidency but didn't decide to vote for their own member of parliament or their own MCA, it's a joke. It's at the presidential level that is the most at stake. And that is where to fix the vote is also the easiest, because it's one vote. So we are quite comfortable. Even though there might be some drawbacks in the other ballot papers, they're not seriously worrying us. It is the presidential ballot that is the most important. And it was IEBC's responsibility to make sure that they have a credible plan. And it was clear that their plan was not credible. Even if the Al Ghurair allegations are incorrect, the fact is that many, many Kenyans believe them. There are pictures, etc., etc. And to conduct a presidential election on the basis of a printing company doing the ballot, which is suspected by so many Kenyans, is a recipe for disaster. And the court ruling is a big rebuke to the IEBC, because it is telling them, you are not doing it right. Public participation, public feeling is crucial, and you don't have that support. They dismissed the NASA suit, you know that. They only went with the public participation, and public participation means public perception, and they said it must be redone. And the other ruling, I think I said earlier, on the polling station being the final, these are two huge rulings for democracy in Kenya, and it will encourage more people to come out, because the notion amongst many NASA supporters is maybe they'll try to steal the election. But these two rulings are a huge boost for NASA.
So are you suggesting that the IBC is not in a position now to secure the printing of the presidential ballot, and therefore Kenya might be forced to have these elections for the other positions, but the presidential one needs to be postponed?
Not at all. First of all, just to set the record straight, NASA does not want this election postponed. There are two reasons. The first one is we are what they call on a roll. We just see support growing and growing for us. And if we now was told to wait another 2 months, I don't even know where the money would come from for the campaign for the next 2 months. NASA doesn't have the resources that the government has. Some of them, of course, corruptly acquired. So why would we want to postpone this election now? What would we do for 2 months? We're running out of cash already. We have enough for this, raised with great difficulty. And thank God many ordinary Kenyans are giving us whatever little they can. So we would not want this election postponed at all. It would hurt us. And there is no reason. Remember, in previous years, in previous decades, the ballot was printed within 3 weeks of the close of the nomination. Technology since then has transformed completely. And they can print this thing in 1/5 of the time that it used to. Nation has new printing press here that can print like 70 million pieces of paper in 1 hour. So it can even be done in Kenya. We have printing presses, very sophisticated. So that is not a problem. It is just propaganda. It's just propaganda. They lose a ruling and they say now the election might be delayed. And the courts are completely aware that the date of the election is set in law. It cannot just be changed. And we are also aware. And we will therefore participate fully in the discussion about choosing the printer that the chairman of the IEBC, Mr. Chebukati, has called for. We will participate and we will make sure that we pick a way that will not delay the election.
If you are just tuning in, this is a special edition of our Saturday morning interview on KBC English Service, and I'm your host, Khainga O'Okwemba. Our guest is veteran Kenyan journalist Salim Lone. Salim Lone is former United Nations Director of News and Media Division under Kofi Annan. He is NASA presidential candidate Raila Odinga's spokesman in the 2017 general election. Salim, I attended the first press briefing by the European Union Election Observer Mission in Nairobi early this month when they dispatched their long-term election observer teams to different parts of the country. Here is what the Deputy Chief of the EU Election Observer Mission to the 2017 general election, Hannah Roberts, had to say that morning.
They will be deploying around the country in teams of 2. We always have them in teams of 2 so that we can get more reliable information and a balance of opinion from them. And they will be going out and seeing the ground reality of what's happening with this electoral process in Kenya. Just to say a few words about the mission overall, we've been invited here by the IEBC, and we will be here throughout the process and for the weeks afterwards to be following the compilation and the announcement of the results, and also something of the complaints and appeals process. We'll be releasing a preliminary statement 2 days after the election and a final report with recommendations for future election reform in Kenya. We're very pleased that our long-term observers are going out to the field today so that they can get operational and we can start to be gathering information in.
That was Hannah Roberts, the Deputy Chief, EU Election Observer Mission to Kenya's 2017 general election. At the time of that preliminary press briefing, the Chief Observer, Mariet Shak, had not yet arrived in the country. The Chief Observer arrived a few days later and convened a meeting with local and international journalists in Nairobi to announce the official launch of the European Union Election Observer Mission to Kenya's 2017 general election. In her statement that morning, the Chief Observer, Mariet Shak, made the following observation.
It is really a pleasure to officially launch the European Union's electoral observation mission to the 2017 elections here in Kenya. There are concerns about the possible outbreak of violence. This is not inevitable, and it is clear that it would create a situation where everybody loses. There is a responsibility for each and everybody to grant each other the right and safety to vote according to his or her conscience, but this responsibility grows in proportion to the influence different actors have over the 2017 elections.
That was Mariet Shak, the Chief Observer of the EU Election Observer Mission to Kenya's 2017 general election. Mariet Shak, just to mention, is a member of the European Union Parliament from the Netherlands. Salim, you heard the Chief Observer very well. She says that there are possibilities. It's not inevitable, but there are possibilities of violence in this election. Do you have the same feeling as Salim?
Yes. First of all, I think having discussed it with the people of the observer mission, I met recently with the deputy observer and others in our team. Very good meeting. That statement about their fearing violence was actually not quite right. We won't go into it because it's pointless. But the fact is, there are concerns that there is a lot of doubt about Jubilee trying to fix this election. I think that is the issue, that there are such concerns that are widespread. They might not be true, but they're widespread concerns. Now, if at the same time you see steps being taken by the IEBC, which makes their operations less transparent, less credible than before, because constantly there's a struggle between trying to get the IEBC to do things more transparently. On the printing tender, they should not have gone through when so much of the country believed there was something crooked in this relationship between Jubilee and Al Ghurair. They should themselves have said, it shouldn't have had to go to court. We are the body given the responsibility to have a fair, free and transparent election. So if you see people are not trusting you, change it. Why didn't they change it? They had to be told by a court. Similarly, the polling station, results being final. That is how it is done ever in the world. In America, in England, the media announces the result before the IEBC does, because it's all public knowledge. Why can't we have the same here? So I don't believe there'll be violence, but if it is a crooked election, people will be very, very unhappy, because NASA has so many supporters. They will be very, very unhappy.
Your final thoughts, Salim?
Sure. Okay. Well, look, the most important thing I think that I want to say is that we have an incredible country. Kenya has so many achievements that have made impact globally. Our IT here, people like M-Pesa, we have so many innovations that the world is in awe at. We are a great people, very hardworking, and despite having had some very poor governments, Kenya has continued to survive, except for that one big episode after 2007. And we are all very proud of that. And all I can say is, if we have managed in all these years to do as well as we did until recently, then imagine with a good government which cares for ordinary people where we would go. We would easily have double-digit economic rate of growth. People are dying to work harder if they get the jobs, to do better. And Kenya can do it. I mean, the level of freedom we have in Kenya, it is a marvel. Despite all the efforts by governments to try to limit it, we are such a vibrant society. Our civil society is filled with great people, not as free as they were before, but still, we are blessed to be Kenyans. We are one of the nations the world respects despite our problems. That's a fact. Kenya has a special place in the world. And I hope we can make it even better.
You're right. Salim Lone, as a veteran journalist, one of the very celebrated Kenyan journalists, and you say that you started it here at KBC in 1968, commenting on Julius Nyerere's book. I put this question to the AU Election Observer Mission about the media so far, because one of the things that they're supposed to also observe is how both the private and the state media, even at this point, how they have covered this election. Very briefly, talk about press freedom. As a journalist, the media, even in this election that are so important to this nation.
Well, first of all, I do believe that we have a level in law of press freedom that is astounding compared to many other countries in Africa. I also know that governments, even before Jubilee, have tried to limit press freedom. You remember the famed raid on the Standard in March 2006. But under Jubilee, there have been many efforts to curb press freedom. And the Prime Minister, Mr. Odinga, he even sided when he was in the cabinet, Prime Minister. He disagreed with the entire cabinet after the media industry came to him about a particularly important bill and said, this is not right. He was the sole person to say in the cabinet, we should not go ahead. And he persuaded the cabinet to change its position. This is under the joint coalition. So we have a lot of press freedom, but before elections, it is inevitable that newspapers and TVs and radio stations, which are relatively open to ideas, before the elections, their owners or those who influence them, they become a little bit uneasy. And they want to try to make sure that their side wins. It is very unfortunate. You expect every owner to have the right to tell his media to sort of, lean a certain way. But you still expect that the media will be, on the whole, objective. Media has a very special space in society. They are given a lot of protections. And therefore, they're not like any other business where you can decide, I will do this and I will do this. They have to honor it. And I fear that I see many examples where the media is biased. Some of the media is biased. And that's not good, because it actually can provoke people into anger. When they see a particular media taking a strong side unfairly, it actually angers people. Not just... one of the reasons why Trump won is because the mainstream media was condemning him so much. I think rightly so, but so much that his supporters said, oh my gosh, the media is totally biased. And they united, and they became more passionate supporters. At the same time, since I've been here, I have seen the media give me very decent coverage. They cover what I say, etc., etc. So I'm not condemning the media. I'm just asking them to make a double effort to be more objective, because sometimes they are not.
Thank you so much, Salim Lone. This is home.
Thank you very much. It is wonderful to be home and to be at the place where I started my journalism career 50 years ago.
And that brings us to the end of the second and last part of this special edition of the Saturday morning interview on KBC English Service with veteran Kenyan journalist and NASA presidential flag bearer Raila Odinga's spokesman Salim Lone. I was your host Khainga O'Okwemba. Until next time, it's goodbye for now.